Hello, everybody. It's me, Fee, or Fiona Timms, otherwise known as White Zulu, author of my autobiography of the same name. And I welcome you all to another chapter of my book. I do hope you're all enjoying my life story, and I must thank all of you for being such dedicated subscribers, especially those who have written such complimentary comments below my videos. They are much appreciated. I would like to point out that the previous South African flag hanging on the wall behind me is not a political statement. It is simply a piece of history in the background of my first 50 years of my life, being born and growing up in my beloved mother country, South Africa. My autobiography, White Zulu, is not a political commentary, and frankly describes my experiences of growing up with the Zulu tribe as my family. That flag is simply a piece of cloth signifying the history of South Africa. It was originally used by the Union of South Africa from 1928 to 1961, and later the Republic of South Africa until 1994. We told Bar and Bob the news of our expected baby on the phone, and this was met by a long silence, rather like the one when Fred had told them he was planning to get engaged. We expected nothing different, but Bar's letters and phone calls to Fred, pleading with him to take up his responsibilities, escalated rapidly. This was because Glen Cruton estate had to be inherited down the male line. And in their own generation, there had been no sons. So Bar and her younger sister Elizabeth hadn't inherited it at all. Bar, as the older sister, had to be custodian of the place until a male heir did come along. The day Fred was born, he'd become the heir to everything entailing the castle, plus 9,000 acres of Highland estate right on the edge of Oban, as well as Mackay Estates Incorporated, which was La Rochelle, the enormous home, and several thousand acres of citrus grove that surrounded it in Florida, in the USA. Fred had never even been to Florida, but as a shareholder had reaped the annual dividends along with his parents and siblings. Bar and Bob, terrified of punitive American tax inheritance laws, had formed a company, Mackay Estates Incorporated, which officially ran the estate on strictly commercial terms and received tax favors that private individuals did not enjoy. Bar began to put her foot down and dictate far more vehemently than she had before that Fred must come back to Scotland and take over the running of the estates. But I've always thought Mummy really enjoyed the control over running Glen Cruton, he mused to me after a particularly long and trying phone call. She loves having all that power. Why does she suddenly want me to take over? I'm perfectly happy settled here in Durban, starting a family, and perhaps buying a little place one of these days. When, unwisely, he mentioned the last bit to his mother, she became almost hysterical. I fear for her sanity, he confided to me. She's now apparently showing signs of going mad with all the stress of her workload. Perhaps I'd better step up to the plate. After all, I am supposed to be doing what she's so clearly been enjoying for so long. Now she said she's had enough. Mummy's even threatened to pass the whole lot on down to Max, his younger brother, if I don't start helping out soon. I reserved comment. Privately, I was convinced that Bar was already crazy. She stepped up the pressure on Fred to come home with constant phone calls. She didn't bother with letters any longer, but rang several nights a week. She cajoled, she whined, and she threatened. Doubt if she can bypass my inheritance and pass me over for Max, said Fred. And anyway, I wouldn't mind in the least if she did and he got the lot. I'm perfectly happy as I am here with you. Another mistake. Frustrated, exasperated, and exhausted to be bombarded with yet another earful after a long day's work, he repeated these words to Bar. She began to cry and carry on, and then he felt bad for upsetting her. What if we do go over to Scotland, he asked me one Sunday night, after a particularly difficult call from his mother. Would you mind living over there for a while, just to see if she's really serious? Is Glen Cruton heated? I asked. Yes, there's central heating everywhere. It was installed after it was built, he replied. Then I don't mind, was my answer. We had to act really fast. My early months of pregnancy had come and gone, and I was well on my way to my 4th month. The sickness had eased up to be just a few waves of nausea in the evenings now, and nothing that I couldn't deal with. I felt really well in myself and begun to bloom as Diana had. We checked with the airline as to what the rules were on pregnant women being allowed to fly. Not after the 6th month on long-haul flights to London, was their reply. I was nearly 4 months, and that left us just 2 months to pack up our stuff, give notice at Fred's work, rehome the kittens, and emigrate. It was far too hurried a decision, but we had no choice. Once Fred had agreed to come home and take over Bar's, well, his own, really, responsibilities, there was no turning back. It would have been like trying to stop the Titanic. It was a horrible time. First, I had to beg Mum and Dad to take the kittens. Please. I've only just rescued them. They won't be any trouble. And they can join the farm cats and catch rats if you don't want to have them in the house and tell the servants to feed them. I implored. There was much prevaricating, and I told Mum truthfully that I'd rather have them both put to sleep than take them back to those awful cages where they'd be put to sleep anyway if nobody took them. They were older now and less likely to be adopted. Mum finally and very grudgingly agreed, and we drove up to the farm as soon as Fred had the time off, me with the kittens nestled down my jersey, perched on the bump I was starting to develop, to leave them at the farm. I wept as I buried my nose in their soft fur and had a huge lump in my throat all the way home. After that weekend, the house felt cold and empty again, without them coming to greet us as we came in the door, as they'd learned to do once they'd settled in. I was heartbroken. I'd fallen in love with those 2 kittens in the short time we'd had them, and had enjoyed sitting in the garden watching them play, ambushing and pouncing on one another and chasing each other up that lovely old fig tree. We had an overseas removal company crate up all our wedding presents, some of them still unused, and shipped them off to Oban in Scotland by sea. All we kept behind were the clothes we needed to take with us on the plane. We sadly gave our notice to our kind, gentle landlady, who'd been so thrilled at the idea of a baby in the house. She'd never been able to have any of her own. We had to dismiss dear old Lucidia, and I gave her bundles of clothes and linen, including our blankets, along with a handsome sum of money from Fred as a thank you. She cried, as did I, when I drove her back to her tiny government-built house in Umlazi, something which Dad had always forbidden me to do. But she had so many izimpahla, that's stuff, that they would have filled a taxi to the roof and the driver would have ripped her off. Time raced by, and we were getting closer to our departure date of the 13th of December, the day after Fred's birthday. We made our final trip to the farm to see the kittens and say goodbye to all our Zulu staff. There were more tears, and I shook hands with old Ngiti, Jumela, Masangu, and so many others. Finally, I had to say goodbye to my old nannies since my birth, Evelina and Lokatia. It was almost too much. I'd grown a visible bump by now, and they'd stroked my belly on previous visits and whispered sweet, wonderful promises to the baby in Zulu, wishing it well. Now we clung to each other and wept. Again, I had to swallow hard on the way back to Durban. I'd had to kiss the kittens goodbye again, and done the same to the two old polo ponies and Rocket, my own horse, whom Dad had promised to keep on as a herd boy's horse. My parents were coming down to stay in their flat in Durban and drive us out to the airport to see us off, as we had to sell Fred's car. Dad gave my Mini to Diana. So hard to see it go off for the last time, my faithful little war pony that had seen me through thick and thin. We drove over to have our last dinner with Nicolette and Robin, my older sister, and they said they'd come and see us off at the airport as well. Eventually, the day came. We'd had to move out of our little home at the end of November, and we spent 2 weeks in a dismal old hotel on the Berea, where the smell of stale cooking oil wafting over the evening breeze made me feel sick as well as sad. Mum and Dad picked us up on the morning of the 13th and drove us down to the airport. There were the Firths, Nicolette and Robin, with their 2 young sons, waiting to see us fly off in the big aeroplane. Mum tried to contain herself as we hugged goodbye. I felt the wetness of her silent tears on my cheek as we parted. Dad squeezed me as tightly as my bump would allow, and then went silent, stony-faced and scarlet. Nicolette and I embraced, and even the ebullient, irrepressible Robin looked miserable as we left. Everything was blurred as I turned back to wave at them for the last time. That's all for this week, everybody. I'll see you again next week. By then, we will have arrived at Glencruton. Goodbye, and thank you so much to John Moslane for being my sound engineer and looking after this system so carefully. And I'll see you next week. Bye-bye. That is all for the time being, and there's more to come next week. I would like to thank John Moslane for putting aside his Friday afternoons to help me produce these videos. Without him, I could not do this. I would also like to thank Sean van Vuren for his sterling work in uploading my videos to my YouTube channel, adding the photos, as well as managing my channel so professionally. If you would like to know more about my other works, I have written 5 books in all, and each one is autobiographical. Please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com, where you will find a lot more information as well as plenty of photographs. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my life story, and there is plenty more to come. A thumbnail photo will be attached each week, and thank you so much for all your support and all the very kind remarks you make in complimenting me on my work. I really appreciate it. Goodbye.